In October 2018, a dirt bike got sold at a Bonhams auction for about $230,500. What drove the price wasn't horsepower or race results. It was the fact that Steve McQueen had ridden this exact bike in a movie. That's the strange thing about motocross history. Vintage isn't rare. You can find a 1985 Honda CR 500 on Craigslist any day of the week. Real rarity is different. We're talking about global production runs that could fit inside a standard two-car garage. Prototypes so radical the factories locked them in storage for 30 years, and machines so over-engineered they bankrupted the empires that built them. This is the story of 14 machines that barely existed, and the empires they built or buried. Let's start with that $250,000 Husqvarna. Number 14, the $250,000 Husqvarna. The 1970 Husqvarna 400 Cross that Steve McQueen rode in Bruce Brown's documentary On Any Sunday isn't rare in the traditional sense. Husqvarna built thousands of these Swedish two-strokes in the early 70s, but this specific bike is one of one. At the Bonhams auction at the Barber Motorsports Museum in Alabama, bidding opened around $50,000 and doubled within minutes. Collectors who'd never owned a dirt bike in their life were raising paddles, looking past the motorcycle itself to secure a direct link to McQueen. The hammer came down at $230,500, still the most expensive dirt bike ever sold at public auction. McQueen actually raced this specific bike too, riding it to a 10th place finish at the 1970 Lake Elsinore Grand Prix, the same race featured in the film. A standard Husqvarna 400 Cross in similar condition sells for around $12,000 today, so his name multiplied the value by roughly 20 times. If you haven't seen On Any Sunday, it holds up. I've linked it in the description. That bike can theoretically be bought if you've got the money. Our next machine cannot be purchased at any price. Only two were ever built, and one of them changed the direction of professional motocross. Number 13, the prototype that killed the two-stroke. On May 17, 1997, at the season finale of the AMA Supercross Championship in Las Vegas, Doug Henry rolled up to the gate on a motorcycle most of the paddock assumed had no business being there. It was a four-stroke, heavier, slower to rev, and by every conventional measure, years behind the two-strokes everyone else rode. Yamaha had put engineer Masakazu Shiohara in charge, a man who'd spent his career building two-stroke Grand Prix engines with essentially zero experience on four-strokes. The first test mule was a 28-horsepower trail bike engine crammed into a YZ250 frame, and it rode about as well as that sounds. But the power delivery was smooth and predictable in a way two-strokes never were. 3 years of development later, Yamaha had a bespoke 397 cubic centimeter 5-valve single, with crankcases machined from solid billet because no casting molds existed yet. Yamaha built exactly 2 of these YZM 400F prototypes. Every gasket was cut by hand. When Henry took the checkered flag that night, the paddock went quiet. Yamaha released the production YZ 400F the following year. Honda and Kawasaki scrambled to catch up, and within 5 years, two-strokes were essentially finished in professional motocross. Both original prototypes still sit in Yamaha's museum in Japan, never sold and never given a price. At this point, they're less a motorcycle than a fossil record. The exact moment an entire sport changed direction. Number 12, 35 motorcycles and a repainted Monarch. In 1958, a young Swedish motocrosser named Kai Bornbusch, the son of a lithographer, which is where the name Lito came from, started a tiny motorcycle workshop in Helsingborg, Sweden, after the factory team he rode for, Monarch, pulled out of racing following the sudden death of their team manager. Bornebusch partnered with engine designer Niels Hedlund and Monarch's former star rider, Sten Lunden. Over the next 7 years, they hand-built a grand total of 35 motorcycles. Here's the twist almost nobody knows. In 1961, Lunden didn't race a brand new Lito to the World Championship. He raced his old Monarch, repainted green and rebadged with Lito's name. And it worked. He won the FIM 500cc World Motocross Championship on what was essentially a rebranded bike from a company that no longer existed. Between 1961 and 63, Lito's claimed podium finishes at the highest level of the sport, beating factory-backed European teams with a workshop that built maybe 5 or 6 motorcycles a year. A documented, authenticated Lito 500 sold at a Maico auction in 2019 for over $80,000. Because so few were built and convincing replicas exist, the paperwork is worth almost as much as the bike itself. Number 11, the contract that ended a factory. The 1975 Puch MC250 twin carb might have the strangest contract clause in racing history. When Belgian rider Harry Everts signed with Austrian manufacturer Puch for the 1975 season, a line buried in the paperwork said if Everts won the World Championship, Puch would shut down its factory motocross program immediately afterward. He won the title, and Puch actually kept their word. Before walking away from the sport, they built a small run of public replicas, under 100 units, priced at roughly $3,000 each, double what a comparable Japanese bike cost at the time. The engineering was genuinely strange. One 32mm Bing carburetor fed a conventional piston port. A second Bing fed a rotary valve built into the magnesium engine cases, making the bike fast and distinctive, and a nightmare to keep running. Here's the cruel part. Everts had to defend his 1976 title on one of those production replicas, because his actual factory race department had already been dismantled, per the contract. One of these Puchs came up at a Maico auction in 2021. Bidding reached $37,000 and still didn't meet the reserve. Number 10. The $80 million mistake. Cannondale, yes, the bicycle company, spent close to $80 million trying to build a revolutionary motocross bike, sold around 1,000 of them, and filed for bankruptcy. The MX400 was announced in 1998 with a features list that read like science fiction. A reverse cylinder head, a layout Yamaha wouldn't use until 2010. Electronic fuel injection when everyone else still ran carburetors. Electric start with no Kickstarter backup. A bolt-together aluminum frame. Development costs started around $20 million, then climbed toward 80, as Cannondale scrapped their original engine and brought in NASCAR engine builders to start over. The finished bike weighed 260 pounds, against roughly 223 for a modern 450. The electric starter tended to fail once the engine got hot, so a stall meant pushing the bike back to the pits. During motocross action's very first week of testing, 2 different engines failed outright. Cannondale filed for bankruptcy in January 2003, and ATK bought what remained of the motorsports division for a fraction of its development cost. Looking back, the irony is hard to miss. Nearly every feature that killed the MX400, the reverse cylinder, the fuel injection, the electric start, is now standard on modern 4-strokes. Cannondale wasn't wrong about where the technology was headed. They were roughly 10 years early and ran out of money before the industry caught up. Number 9. The prototype KTM buried for 30 years. In 1990, KTM asked American suspension designer Horst Leitner to build them, in his own words, the 125 of the future. What Leitner delivered was years ahead of its time. A chromoly frame using a design KTM's engineers called parallax, which predicted the aluminum twin spar frames the whole industry adopted 7 years later. It also had the first laid-down rear shock with no linkage, and an exhaust routed down through the swing arm. The whole bike weighed under 190 pounds. KTM's own engineers were visibly excited about it, but internal politics got in the way. Rather than greenlighting production, KTM quietly shelved the project. The single prototype went into an R&D storage room and stayed there, untouched, for 3 decades, until a 2020 warehouse cleanout found it, still completely original, under a layer of dust. Only one was ever built. Leitner's suspension ideas eventually found their way into mountain bikes and automotive applications, but this specific machine never got to prove itself on a track. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the machines that shape modern motocross, hitting subscribe actually helps this channel make more of them. Number 8. The bikes you could never buy. From here on, we're not really talking about production motorcycles anymore. We're talking about factory secrets. Honda Racing Corporation ran its Works motocross program with a level of secrecy closer to classified R&D than professional racing. From 1976 to 1991, Honda built somewhere between 10 and 20 RC 500M units every year, exclusively for contracted factory riders. You couldn't buy this bike from a dealer, from a factory connection, or for any amount of money. At the end of each season, riders handed the bikes back to the factory. The 1976 Type 2 debuted with external spring forks, a design Honda abandoned after 1 season, alongside early Showa cartridge fork internals that wouldn't reach production motorcycles for another decade. Magnesium and titanium throughout, cylinders hand-ported by Honda's own engineers. Later versions grew to 491 cubic centimeters and switched to water cooling as the program evolved. Brad Lackey's verified 1978 RC 500M is one of only 2 or 3 examples confirmed to exist in private hands today. Authenticated works bikes with documented rider history have sold for anywhere from $75,000 to well over $200,000 when they surface at all, since verifying one means matching serial numbers against Honda's own factory records. Number 7. Kawasaki's secret shutdown. In 1977, Kawasaki did something almost no manufacturer would risk. They shut down their entire KX production line just to free up engineers for research and development. What came out of that shutdown was the SR380, a hand-built works bike only 2 or 3 factory riders ever touched. Jimmy Weinert's 1978 SR380 sold at a Maico auction in 2025 for $47,300. Pre-production magnesium crankcases, a custom Boyesen reed valve, and a hand-formed expansion chamber helped it make over 46 horsepower at just 218 pounds. Weinert and teammate Galen Mosier raced these machines in real AMA events through 1978 and 79, field testing Kawasaki's next generation in live competition. Once testing wrapped up, most of the bikes simply disappeared. Weinert kept his. One is being restored in Australia. A third may exist in a private collection, but nobody's confirmed it publicly. Number 6. The bike that started Japan's takeover. The 1968 Suzuki TM250 is often called the rarest production dirt bike in the world. It was the first production motorcycle ever sold as a near-exact replica of a factory works machine. Suzuki hand-built around 110 of them, shipping about 65 to the United States for testing. Each one came with a questionnaire asking the rider to send feedback back to Japan. Because Suzuki was so new to motocross, they were essentially using their own customers as unpaid test engineers. The bike borrowed heavily from Suzuki's 1967 RH67 Grand Prix works machine. Twin exhaust pipes, a long-stroke engine, a distinctive silver and blue paint scheme. Heavier than the competition from Husqvarna and CZ, but it proved something bigger, that a Japanese manufacturer could build a genuine works-spec motocross bike and sell it to the public. Joel Robert would go on to win multiple world championships for Suzuki in the years that followed. This awkward, heavy little TM250 is where that dynasty started. Fewer than 15 are known to still exist today in any condition. Documented original examples now sell for $30,000 to $40,000, and the number keeps climbing. Number 5. The two-wheel drive experiment. In 2004, Yamaha released the world's first production two-wheel drive motorcycle, then discontinued it after a single year. The exact production number is genuinely disputed. Yamaha's original plan called for around 250 units built in Italy. Some later reporting puts the total closer to 445. Either way, almost none reached the United States because of EPA and DOT regulations, and only about 20 made it to Australia. The WR45OF 2-track used a hydraulic system co-developed with Öhlins. A gearbox-driven pump sent fluid through lines to a motor built into the front wheel hub, automatically diverting engine power to the front tire whenever the rear wheel started to slip. No chains, no drive shaft, essentially automatic traction control years before that kind of electronics existed on a dirt bike. It actually worked. David Fretenier rode 1 to 7th overall at the 2004 Dakar Rally and first in the 450cc class, beating riders on bikes with far bigger engines. But the extra weight, cost, and specialized maintenance meant most riders never saw the point, and Yamaha never built a second generation. Number 4. The greatest bike that helped bury its own company. The 1981 Maico 490 Mega 2 is widely considered one of the best open-class motocross bikes of its era. That year, the small German manufacturer sold more open-class bikes in the United States than Honda's entire motocross lineup combined. Then it all fell apart. In 1982, Maico's Corte Casa shock shafts started snapping. Gearboxes failed, and wheel hubs exploded under stress. On top of that, the Maisch family that owned the company was locked in an internal dispute over its direction. By May of 1983, the German government declined a bailout, and production effectively ended. The Spider and M-Star models built between 1983 and 1986 came out of bankruptcy proceedings in small, undocumented numbers. Nobody was keeping careful records while the business collapsed around them. Well-restored, late-era Maicos now start around $9,000 and climb from there. What makes them truly rare goes beyond the low numbers. The factory's original tooling and blueprints were lost in the collapse, so restorers today often machine replacement parts from scratch in their own garages. Number 3. The electric bike that beat the GOAT. In December 2017, at the Geneva Supercross's Dual Cup, a head-to-head exhibition series. Josh Hill lined up against Ricky Carmichael, the rider most people consider the greatest of all time in this sport. Hill was riding Alta Motors Redshift MXR, a 50-horsepower electric motorcycle with instant torque, no clutch, no gears to shift. There was a real complication going in. A shipping mix-up meant Hill's own bike never made it to Europe, so he raced a different Redshift borrowed from another Alta customer, with his own suspension bolted on at the last minute. Carmichael took the first night. Hill came back and won the second. When the series was tallied, Hill had taken it 3 races to 2, an electric motorcycle beating the sport's most decorated rider on a borrowed bike in genuine head-to-head racing. Alta had been founded in 2010 with backing from Tesla's co-founders, and by 2018 they'd raised around $45 million and signed a partnership with Harley-Davidson. 6 months later, Harley walked away to build its own electric research division instead. Alta couldn't find replacement funding and shut down permanently in October 2018. Surviving Redshift MXRs are now collected as proof that, for one strange night in Geneva, electric power had already caught up to gasoline, right before the company that built it disappeared. Number 2. 3 engines, 1 transmission. In 1988, KTM was moving its Grand Prix engines away from piston port induction toward a modern case-reed design and needed real racing data before committing to it. So they built exactly 3 prototype 250 reed valve works bikes for Grand Prix riders Peter Hansen and Heinz Kinnegadner to test in live competition. These 3 motorcycles quietly shaped how KTM's production engines were built for the next decade. Only one is known to have survived in fully restored condition, occasionally appearing at vintage events like Farleigh Castle in the UK. The other 2 haven't surfaced publicly in years. Number 1. The Marine Corps ran on jet fuel. The Hayes Diversified Technologies M1030M1 is the only diesel-powered off-road motorcycle ever successfully deployed in active military operations. Built between 2004 and 2008, the U.S. Marine Corps ordered 440 of them, with additional unspecified numbers going to NATO allies. The point of the bike was fuel logistics. It could run on JP8 jet fuel, standard diesel, biodiesel, or kerosene, meeting NATO's requirement that every vehicle in a convoy run on one common fuel. Based on a modified Kawasaki KLR 650, the 584cc engine delivered around 96 miles per gallon at 55 miles per hour, a range of over 400 miles on one tank. Fred Hayes himself tested an early version at Bonneville, setting a land speed record for diesel motorcycles in the process. Surplus units occasionally show up for sale today, usually around $10,000. The problem is the diesel injection pump, custom built exclusively for this military contract. So when something breaks, there's essentially no supply of replacement parts anywhere in the civilian world. So what actually makes a dirt bike rare? It's not just a low production number. Honda built the CR500 for 17 years, and you can still find one on Craigslist. That's just age, not rarity. Real rarity sits at the intersection of scarcity and significance. The Suzuki TM250 matters because it marked the beginning of Japan's takeover of motocross. The YZM400F matters because it ended the 2-stroke era in a single race. The Cannondale MX400 matters because it proved a company could be right about the future and still not survive long enough to see it happen. And the works bikes, the Hondas, the Kawasaki's, the KTM's, are rare simply because they were never meant to leave the factory at all. Somewhere in Japan, Yamaha still has those 2 original YZM400F prototypes, sitting exactly where they've sat for almost 30 years. In Austria, KTM still has Horst Leitner's forgotten 125, rediscovered under a layer of dust after 3 decades in storage. By now, these machines function less as motorcycles and more as artifacts, proof that being right about the future doesn't guarantee you get to stick around for it, and that some of the most important machines this sport ever produced were never meant to be owned by the public at all. If this kind of deep dive into motorcycle history is your thing, subscribing actually helps this channel make more of them. And I'd really like to know which bike we missed. Drop it in the comments, I read all of them, and the best suggestions might just become part 2.